I was really forced to take a look at myself and go, okay, well, is professional sport really what I want to do? Sport at the top level is challenging. Like, everyone thinks it's a dream. It is seriously hard work. The whole sort of KP saga that unfolded just at the back end of my career, like that was a horrible way to go out. India are the number one team in the world. You look at their squad strength, there's not a weakness there. It seems baffling that anyone wouldn't have them favourites. Virat is a worthy successor to Tendulkar in every way. I think Ben Stokes has played probably 3 of the 5 best innings of all time, I would have said, for England. You're living a nightmare from the moment she got diagnosed with incurable cancer out of nowhere. You're sort of living one day at a time because that's the only way you can do. But of course there was this huge elephant in the room, which was that the cancer was incurable, and at some stage it was going to win that battle.
Well, hello everybody, and a warm welcome then to In the Zone, which is a brand new series brought to you by Gambling Zone, the trusted online gambling comparison site. So my name's Manish Bhasin, and of course, as part of this series, I'm talking to some of the biggest names in sport, asking them about their successes, their challenges that they've faced to get to the very top of their field. Now, field actually happens to be quite apt in this episode because I'm joined, I'm delighted to say, by one of England's most successful Test captains. He's won the Ashes 3 times, no less, both home and away, which is no mean feat, of course. He's also helped England reach the top of the Test rankings in his time as skipper, and he's also the founder of the Ruth Strauss Foundation in honour of his late wife. I'm delighted to say, Sir Andrew Strauss joins me today.
Good afternoon.
How are you, Andrew?
I'm very good, thanks. Nice to be here.
Now, look, I know you've had 4 years to get used to the word sir. Or have you got used to it yet?
No, I find the whole thing slightly odd still, actually. Yeah. And what's most amusing is when people come up to you and go, do I need to call you sir? Which I always feel...
Which I didn't actually clarify.
You didn't actually ask me that, but the answer is no.
But I thought I'd start with sir to get on the right foot.
No, it's obviously a huge honour, and if someone feels like you're worthy of receiving something like that, it's amazing to be recognised in that way.
Well, look, listen, there's so much for us to get through. No, not least the Cricket World Cup, which is on our doorstep, or just around the corner, I should say. But let's talk about you as an individual and your notable achievements and challenges. So start right at the beginning, which I always think is a good place to begin. Born in Johannesburg in South Africa. So what was your early memories of that, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, lived there for the first 6 years of my life. My parents both South Africans, and that South African upbringing is, very much an outdoors one. Obviously, back then, I think back then we didn't even really have television. It's not that I'm that old. It's just South Africa was quite sort of behind the times in that regard.
You're younger than me, by the way, so you're clearly not that old.
And so out and about. Very much a active lifestyle, and massive interest in sport right from the start. My parents both played tennis. My dad was a big rugby player. So I just felt like from ball one, really, I was kicking balls, throwing balls, hitting balls, but didn't really play that much formal sport until I came to the UK.
See, this narrative, right, of being South African born, shaped in Australia, some people say, England captain. Does that grate with you sometimes?
No, not really. I mean, I came to England when I was sort of 7.5. I've had all my education here, so I've always felt very English. I think I've benefited perhaps from those other experiences I've had, but it's always felt like home to me. So, as you know, if you play sport for any length of time, you sort of get quite desensitized to what people say, and people said a lot about me. That certainly one hasn't grated too much.
Actually, you talk about how it kind of played a part in your development, moving around the places. So how did you benefit from that? How did it shape you in your formative years?
Well, it's interesting when you look at children. I think so much is shaped in those sort of first 6 or 7 years of life. Your attitudes, how you perceive yourself, and I suppose being interested in sport, being in a family that was interested in sport, meant that my passion really gravitated very quickly towards playing and watching sport. And I suppose if you combine that with quite a competitive household, a very competitive household, actually,
What, with your sisters?
Well, no, yeah, so
Or with your parents as well?
Yeah, I think my parents were very, very keen for us as children to do well in anything that we did, and they were very focused on the sort of academic side. And my sisters all were playing sport and were very high achievers academically, etc. So that was a sort of environment around the house. And so when you combine the passion with the sort of competitive nature and the focus and I suppose the work ethic, I think that all comes together to give you a pretty good shot of making it.
At what age did you decide to become a cricketer?
Well, not till I was 19, really.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I was playing cricket and I was playing rugby and I was playing golf and I was playing tennis and, quite frankly, they were recreational things mainly. I was playing club cricket and a little bit of Oxfordshire under-19 cricket and I was playing rugby at school and at university. And so it was only when I got to Durham University, got in the team there, realised everyone else on the team had a county contract other than me, that I thought, I should give this a crack here. Maybe I've got a chance. So, yeah, very late developer, really, when you look at most cricketers these days who've been, identified and earmarked from the age of 14 or 15. But in a lot of ways, I'm grateful for that because it meant I was able to go to university. Not many people do that now. And play other sports for longer as well. So that late specialisation, I think, is a benefit, actually.
I saw a brilliant quote from Ben Hutton, your childhood friend.
Right, go on.
You're a bit wary now. But he described you as a child as messy, chaotic and disorganised. Would you go along with that?
That's rich coming from him. Well, yes and no. Like, I think in kind of admin and things like that, never been a strong point for me. I've probably got better over time, but I think I've always had quite an organised mind, actually, and certainly my approach to cricket or sport has always been relatively methodical, actually. So, yeah, I know what he's saying. I know,
but
I've done some dumb things in my time. I know that much, but
yeah.
But I think just when it came to sort of actually doing the sports stuff, I've always been relatively kind of well structured in my approach.
Yeah, but that's the sports side. Because I tell you what was interesting. Along with that same quote, it was kind of observed that you got married a lot earlier than all your friends, right? So when you met Ruth in Australia, you got married at 26. So in terms of being grounded, settled, how key was that in your development as an individual?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I met Ruth when I was 21. We had to sort of decide pretty quickly whether this was a serious thing or not because she was in Australia and I was in England. So I had to grow up, I think, quite quickly, make some big decisions. And then also I got made Middlesex captain at the age of 24. So, I think I found myself maturing quickly and not being part of that sort of environment, which I think a lot of professional sports people get involved in, which is, I suppose people would describe it as living the dream, but it's really having people doing stuff for you all the time, never having to take responsibility for anything, being almost institutionalized and being out on the lash, and taking advantage of that. And, so that was never my experience of professional sport. Yeah. No, well, it was, I had too many responsibilities too young, really.
Actually, talking about Middlesex, obviously that's where you based all your county career at. I mean, I know you had a loan at Somerset at some point, but
for one game.
For one game.
Really count
it doesn't count. Okay, but it's down in the stats books, and that's what cricket's all about, right? It's stats.
Yeah.
But at Middlesex, when you first arrived, that was quite a dressing room, right? I mean, Mike Gatting, Mark Ramprakash, Phil Tufnell, Angus Fraser. It was I suppose they didn't suffer fools gladly. But is it true, right? Because of your public school background, they often teased you for that, albeit in good jest. But would that make you more eager to prove yourself that you're there on merit, not just on your schooling education?
Yeah, well, I think I was definitely forced to toughen up going into that environment. The Middlesex environment in those days was a very sort of hierarchical one.
Yeah. Old school, right?
Old school, a lot of piss taking, and people would take the mick out of you for whatever it might be that they could. And for me, it was my background. I think I was probably the only public school boy in that environment at that point.
But I find that quite
which
surprising.
is bizarre, yeah, but it shows how cricket has changed in 20 years or so. But so yeah, they didn't suffer fools gladly, and I was young and naive and pretty soft and wet behind the ears, and so I had to toughen up. It was also, quite frankly, the first time in my life that I'd failed at anything. I'd found life relatively easy up to that point, both sporting wise and academically, and suddenly my first year for Middlesex second team, I averaged like 14 with the bat. So I was sort of right at the bottom of the batting averages as an opening batsman. It's not a place you want to be. And so I was really forced to take a look at myself and go, okay, well, is professional sport really what I want to do? And if it is, then I've got to change my approach completely. I've got to professionalize my preparation, and I've got to learn quickly.
How hard was that?
Well, once I'd made the decision, it was fine. But I was sort of coming from a university.
You've always been known for your technique more than anything in cricket.
Yeah, I don't think. I think if I had one super strength as a player, I don't think it was my technique. I think it was my temperament. I think that's probably what separated me from other people. I was never the cleanest hitter of the ball. I had a game that kind of suited top level cricket because I was good off the back foot. But I think I was able to remain calm when other people, maybe the match or the scenario or the environment got to them.
In terms of your international career, I mean, there's so much to talk about, and we don't have enough time, but let's go through some of the highlights. But first of all, the debut, the ODI against Sri Lanka. You look back at that thinking, this is not meant to be this way, surely.
Well,
that was a tough introduction.
Yeah,
wasn't
it was a tough tour, but at the same time, I think when you're just making your way, you're just trying to sort of savor everything and try and really get a feel for what international cricket's like. We had that one game where we lost very heavily, and then I think the other couple were rain affected, so we didn't play much cricket there. And then we pretty quickly went over to the West Indies, and I got a few runs, and that was important. I think the first time you get runs in an England shirt, it's a massive hurdle to overcome, because from that moment onwards, you kind of know that not necessarily good enough to do it for a long period of time, but that you're not overawed by the situation. That the situation is not preventing you from performing, and that set me up very well for my Test debut in 2004.
What a debut, Andrew. Come on. I mean, you were so close to getting 200s.
I know.
If it wasn't for NASA.
I know. I mean, I hate NASA. And not just because he ran me out, just generally. But no, I think it was, it was the dream.
I mean, for some people who might not know, right? So you got 112 on debut.
Yeah.
And you're in your mid-80s in your second innings, and he runs you out.
Yeah, and NASA comes up to me and goes, Strauss, I think we need to up the scoring rate. Let's look to run a bit quicker between the wickets. And I was like thinking, I think we're fine. Like, the scoring rate is absolutely fine. And if it needs increasing, you might need to place a few shots. That's what I was thinking in my head. And then the next ball, he just whacked one straight at the fielder and ran at me. So, I do hold him fully responsible for that. But it was the dream debut. Forget about that for a moment. To score 100 in your first game on your home ground,
it doesn't get better than that.
It's staggering. I mean, that is what dreams are made of.
Do you have an out of body experience when you think of that sometimes? Thinking, was that really me out there in the middle?
Well, occasionally it sort of comes up on Instagram or whatever when the MCC is showing old footage, and how young I look, how much hair I had, how virile I was. But great days, and of course all of these things pass in the blink of an eye, and you don't really have a lot of time to look back on them and savor them, which is why you've got to really appreciate those moments when you're in them, actually.
Including the 2005 Ashes series, which even now when you look back at it, you can't quite believe the end results to some of those games, particularly the second test at Edgbaston. When you look back at that dressing room, the Flintoffs, the Trescothics was there, of course, Kevin Peterson as well, and we'll get back to him a little later. But what made that dressing room so special?
Well, I think it was a team that had been on a really, really strong run of results for probably 18 months leading into that Ashes series. I think it was very settled leadership with Michael Vaughan and Duncan Fletcher, both of whom were phenomenal at their jobs. A lot of confidence in that dressing room. And I think also that sort of bit between our teeth that, we'd lost to Australia for so long, but this might be our time.
First time in 18 years.
Yeah, exactly. So there was that real buzz of anticipation, and a lot of quite sort of strong characters, self-sufficient characters who weren't going to back down under pressure, which against an Australian side is so important. And also, more than anything, a good bowling attack. When you look at Harmison and Hoggard and Simon Jones and Ashley Giles, I mean, we had a very, very well-balanced team for English conditions in particular.
Yeah. In 2009, there was quite a shift in the landscape, right, for England, with the Peter Moores leaving his post, KP resigning, and there was this it felt like a hastily arranged press conference, and you were installed as captain. I've got to ask you, because it felt like a nadir at that point, and you'll agree with me on that, to be given the role to captain your country. I mean, what made you say yes at that point?
Well, you don't turn it down, really. I mean, I never
only
felt
because the pressures that come with it.
Yeah, I know, but I think if you have that opportunity, and I was, by that stage, I'd been playing cricket for England for 4 or 5 years. I felt like I was ready for a new challenge, and I also thought, quite frankly, that the job was going to be a lot easier, given that Freddie Flintoff had to go at it, KP had to go at it, and so maybe the way was clearer for me to do it. And actually, I think also on reflection, taking over at a low moment is probably the best thing you could possibly do. I think the really hard thing is to start at the top and then try and maintain that. So we had a really good runway for improvement. And I think, like any team, it's settled leadership's so crucial. If the coach and the captain get on well together, if the coach and the captain have a sort of similar philosophy on how the game should be played, then that just sort of feeds off on everyone else. And if they've got clarity of what is expected of them, then that allows them to go and do their job. So, we had a little period before that where that wasn't necessarily the case. And I think there was quite a lot of relief around the dressing room that, okay, at least we know what we're doing here, and off we go.
I talked about the pressure. The media intrusion in terms of following, almost every footstep, maybe off the field as well as on the field. What was that like for you?
Well, I mean, in truth, I think I was lucky. We had a pretty good run, so there weren't too many really low moments as captain. I'd always sort of got on reasonably well with the media. They never came after me directly. I always felt it necessary to sort of divorce myself from it as much as I could and just not read papers and whatever as much as I could.
Yeah.
I think that's harder to do now, quite frankly. I think it's harder to
with social media now.
But so and also quite frankly, players are building their own brand, so they want to get content out there and play the game a bit.
So do you think you've played at the right time in that respect?
Well, I think for me, because I think I would have found that stuff quite difficult, and for me, I'm quite good at just focusing on one thing. I don't want to be focusing on 5 things at once and making sure that I've got my latest Instagram post out there, whatever. So, but for other people, it's more comfortable for them to do. But it's not easy. Hey, look, sport at the top level is challenging. Like, everyone thinks it's a dream. It is seriously hard work, and it's seriously stressful, and it takes every inch of your courage and your tenacity and your competitive spirit, because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And it over a long period of time, it just keeps asking more and more questions of you. You can't ever be satisfied in a lot of ways.
Was there ever a point where you doubted yourself, thinking, actually, I'm better off without the captain's armband?
No, but I think there were plenty of times where I felt, if I don't start playing better, am I worth my place in this team? And no one likes to let your teammates down. No one likes to feel like you're the sort of handbrake that's keeping the team from performing at its best. So, as a captain, that's the real challenge: is you've got to keep performing with the bat in your hand and still looking after the running of the environment and getting involved in the selection and media plans and tour scheduling and all that sort of stuff. Like keeping all of that going at the same time, all those plates in the air is far from simple.
What was your one toughest challenge as captain?
Well, I think there are two things. I think winning in Australia. Mm-hmm. So, no one underestimates the size of that challenge. It's been done so infrequently by England teams. So, that one was a really positive challenge for us to take on and overcome. And then I think right at the end where there was that sort of team fallout and split and, the whole sort of KP saga that unfolded just at the back end of my career. Like that was a horrible way to go out, quite frankly. And, I'm sure we've all got regrets about how that played out in the public eye as well.
Would you have done anything differently on that front?
Well, I think you've always got to ask yourself that question. Could it have been avoided? And it probably, by the time it got to that point, it was too late. Like, so there undoubtedly things that could have happened before that, either by the ECB or by myself and Andy Flower, or by KP and maybe some of the other players in the team.
Is that the way, because the way he became alienated in the dressing room? Was that what
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what happened to a certain degree. And, I think you want every team to feel like we're all pushing the same direction. And there were times where it just wasn't, it wasn't a high functioning team, which is a shame because it had been for so long up to that point. But the point really there is nothing ever stays the same. Things are always evolving and changing. A team dynamic is a dynamic. And the moment you sort of just assume that everything's okay is kind of you're sowing the seeds of your own downfall.
If you don't mind me asking then, Andrew, are you on talking terms with Kevin these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's water well under the bridge.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean we played golf together a couple of months ago and done a bit of work for Sky as well. So yeah, that's in the dim and distant past.
Okay. When you got the captain's armband, did you bring in any kind of traits from other skippers that you'd worked under that you used to your benefit?
No, I think one of the things that I was very keen to instill right from the start was this idea of players taking responsibility more. Like I think in modern sport, we run the risk of it becoming a very coach-led environment where, the coaches and the analysts and the physical trainers and the mental skills coaches are all sort of bombarding you with information. And while that's all useful, I wanted to sort of flip that on its head and say, right, that the players need to take more responsibility for their performances, and they can dip in and out of all this information that we have. But what we can't have is players acting like children. Like they have to be able to make big, strong decisions out in the middle under pressure, and so we've got to create an environment that allows them to do that. And so, yeah, that's what we focused on. I mean, definitely, of course, you always take things from other captains, but it's not that relevant. Like, Michael Vaughan was a very different person to myself. Andrew Flintoff was a very different person to myself. So you got to do what feels natural. And for me, it was all about the environment. I felt like if we could just build an environment where we're all going the same direction, that we were playing for each other, then I've just seen so many instances in my life of a team becoming greater than the sum of its parts. And conversely, I've seen many occasions where a team full of great players has been absolute shambolic. Yeah. So that was the thing for me.
Yeah. And I'm sure that would have been perhaps one of the driving factors during your time at the ECB. I think you were there for 3.5 years working towards the 2019 World Cup. But then you had to take a step back, quite understandably so, because of Ruth. And I suppose if we rewind the clock, and I can't believe it's already been, 2018, when Ruth tragically passed away with a very, very rare form of lung cancer. When you look back at that now, how incredibly difficult was it for you and your boys?
I mean, you're living a nightmare from the moment she got diagnosed with incurable cancer out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, just so surprised. And then the whole way through that journey and the various stages of treatment, and obviously just understanding and appreciating what's really important in life, and trying to be there to support her, and make sure that that she had the sort of structures in place to help her through all of that. I mean, you're sort of living one day at a time, because that's the only way you can do. But of course, there was this huge elephant in the room, which was that the cancer was incurable, and at some stage, it was gonna win that battle, so to speak. And so, I hated the idea of I couldn't get my head around it, and that's why I have such a great respect for and envy, really, for the way that Ruth approached it, which was really a sort of attitude of acceptance. Okay, this is going to happen. So I need to, enjoy the time I've got left on this earth, and do everything I can to keep as fit and healthy as possible, but also prepare Andy and the boys for what was to come. And that sort of led us towards this unbelievable counsellor, Jenny Thomas, that we saw. And she sort of facilitated and helped us with those really tough conversations about Ruth's death and what she wanted for the boys, and how I needed to be as a single parent with them, etc., etc. So awful stuff to go through. Wouldn't wish it on anyone, but at the same time, Ruth always had that attitude of, rather than why me, kind of why not me. This happens to people all the time, thousands of people in the UK every year. So
I mean, that's an incredible stance to take.
Yeah, but I think that was always her sort of outlook on life, which is, she was very charitable in the way she looked at things. She was always sort of much more conscious of other people and people going through tougher things in their life than herself, and so very unselfish in that respect. And I mean, as you say, it takes incredible bravery and courage and perspective to allow that to happen. But I think it made the whole journey a lot easier for all of us, actually.
In her memory, you've launched the Ruth Strauss Foundation. So tell me more about the work that you do. I mean, we can see it visibly, obviously the recent test match, the Red for Ruth Day, but what is it? What's it about?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea of the Ruth Strauss Foundation came as a result of a conversation I had with Ruth about 2 weeks before she died, and we were just talking about, okay, how do we make something positive come out of this? And I sort of, started talking about the possibility of launching a foundation. And she just wrote down a few notes from that conversation about what she'd want a foundation to do. And she talked about helping families going through grief. She talked about helping people to do death well. She talked about sharing sort of knowledge and raising awareness of non-smoking lung cancers. And so we sort of got that document as our sort of guiding framework, really. And so we help families prepare for the death of a parent. So either directly through our family support service, so people who are facing that, a parent who's got incurable cancer can come and speak to one of our practitioners who's going to help them, the whole family, through that process.
Because I feel in moments of that utmost intensity, children, this is my initial reaction, is children need to be protected. But you take the other view, don't you? As in, like, it has to be opened up, it has to be spoken about. You can't protect them in these kind of situations.
And that's the real challenge, because as a parent, all we want to do is protect our kids all the time. And unfortunately, the kids kind of know it's going on anyway. They can feel it. And so, them being part of that, and making sure that, you've got good advice and good ideas as to how to guide them through this process, including, of course, obviously after the death as well. It's so important. And it's amazing how many people have come up to me who are in their sort of 50s and 60s who've said, look, it's amazing what work you do at the foundation. My parents died when I was 12 or 13, and, that parent was never spoken about again, and that sort of stiff upper lip mentality, which is very damaging. So we do it directly, or we run training programs to train up healthcare professionals. We're just about to start doing a training program in schools as well. And then on the other side, we're doing that sort of knowledge sharing and raising awareness of non-smoking lung cancer. So we've contributed to some research projects and some public campaigns, etc., etc. So there's a lot to keep us busy. But we're talking about sort of 40,000 kids every year that are going to lose a parent in those circumstances, and so there's a lot of people to help.
So tell me then, how can people support the Ruth Strauss Foundation, Andrew?
Easiest thing is to just go to our website, ruthstraussfoundation.com, and there's plenty of information of the work we do, but also ways to donate as well. And as you'll be aware, we have some big events, including Red for Ruth, which happens every year at Lord's, which is another way that people can get involved with the charity.
Great way to keep Ruth's memory alive. And a reminder, you're watching or listening to In the Zone in association with Gambling Zone, your trusted online gambling comparison site. We'll be looking forward to the Cricket World Cup very shortly. So In the Zone so far with Andrew Strauss. We've covered him as a cricketer and I suppose life after cricket. Now to talk about cricket in the future and what's to come. The Cricket World Cup in India is always a massive occasion. In fact, I was there for the last one in 2011, which was quite some occasion, as you can understand it, with the host nation winning it. But I think whatever happens this time round, Andrew, it's fair to say we won't get a closer finish to the last one.
No, well, exactly. I mean, that the 2019 World Cup final, I was there at Lord's, and just the pain. Actually, it was just the pain of watching that unfold, and the prospect.
I was in pain watching it like hundreds of miles away.
Well, I think the prospect of us getting so close and then not getting over the line, and England would never have a better chance of winning the World Cup. So to go through all of that and the super over and the overthrows and everything, I mean, it was absolutely
and then to go
torturous.
back on boundary count back.
Exactly, and I think it was definitely one of those ones that when you look back at it, England were kind of fated to win it, weren't they? And it was a great story for cricket in this country. And I suppose for a host nation to win, it's always a lovely sort of result. But obviously in India, very different environment, different conditions, different challenges. And India as hosts are going to be very hard to beat.
How much are you looking forward to the occasion?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I mean, in a lot of ways, 50 over cricket's taken very much of a back seat in between World Cups these days. The rise of global T20, the IPL. We've just had a phenomenal Ashes series, which has really whet the appetite for Test cricket again. So 50 over cricket's sort of lower profile, but the World Cup's a time when it really comes to the forefront of people's minds. And I always think, in truth, the 50 over World Cup, I still think is the World Cup.
So do I.
Yeah.
But should it not still be seen that way? Or do you think it has indeed gone down that priority list?
Well, no, I don't think it has in terms of the global event. I think those sort of bilateral series maybe have to a certain degree. And of course, the T20 World Cup is played frequently now as well. But I still think it's the World Cup. It's the one that kind of links you back to whatever, the late 70s or the 80s or the 92 World Cup being, a good example from an England's perspective. So, I think players are desperate to win it. I think the style of cricket's evolved hugely on the back of T20 cricket as well, and that makes it extremely watchable in a way that it wasn't when I played. And when I played, you were sort of nudging it around in those middle overs. They don't do that anymore.
But it's funny you say that because I was looking at the runs that are scored by teams on average. T20 cricket has been more prominent in the last 10 years, right? But over the last, I was back in even 2011 when I was in India watching it. Teams are still scoring 320, 350. I don't think the scoring's moved on that much more, has it?
Well, I think if you look at, England have taken it to a new level. They've scored 450 and 480.
But you're going to see this more regularly now.
Well, I think in a World Cup it's a bit harder to play that way.
In those conditions.
Yeah, but I definitely, if you look at scoring generally, I'd say it's gone up. And certainly some teams in particular really pushed it to another degree, and England probably being in the forefront of that. So I feel like that will continue. But one of the interesting things, as far as I'm concerned, about World Cups is generally in World Cups you see a progression in the sport in some way, in the format. So you see teams trying different tactics. You see a different philosophy being embedded for the first time on the world stage. And then the game's never quite the same again. So, the 2011 World Cup, we had loads of teams opening the bowling with spin, for instance, which was
unheard of.
unheard of and very frustrating for an opening batsman, I've got to be honest. And then, of course, 2019 World Cup, we had that England's new novel approach sort of being embedded for the first time. So none of us can be 100% sure what this World Cup is going to offer.
Any inclination on that front?
Well, I definitely feel like, as we sort of start bringing in more and more of the T20 format, you might see these sort of matchups being played a bit more. So batsmen coming in at particular times rather than set batting orders. Bowlers again sort of being targeted or targeting certain batsmen, etc., etc. So a bit more flexibility in approach, I think just smart captaincy, using the fielding regulations, etc., etc. I don't know. I mean, that's the great thing, and it's going to be fascinating to watch.
But also, in bygone years, when you have World Cups in Southeast Asia, the condition is talked about a lot, and understandably so, very different to the West. But because of the growth of IPL, you've got more overseas players who've experienced those conditions. So that's become less of an unknown factor, right?
Well, I think that is true. Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. I think also, the facilities and pitches and grounds in India have improved generally. However, what I would say is when you look at the World Cup and the venues that are being played on, there's a huge discrepancy in those conditions and what those pitches do and the soils, etc. So I think if you want to win a World Cup over in India now, you have to have a very adaptable team that has a very strong balance to it. You can't just rely on spin. You can't rely on fast bowling. You need to be able to deal with the dew well, for instance. And you need batters that are able to be equally proficient against a spinner opening the bowling or, 150 kilometre an hour pace bowler. So that adaptability is crucial, which is why when you're looking at teams that might win this, you're looking for the best balanced squads, I think.
So you said India are your favourites.
I just think they have to be. I mean, it would be
those
ridiculous.
Nations have won 4 of the last 5.
Yeah, and it'd be ridiculous that India are the number 1 team in the world. You look at their squad strength. There's not a weakness there. So, and they're obviously at home. So it seems baffling that anyone wouldn't have them favourites. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win it.
Yeah, but does that not conversely bring more pressure on this Indian side, which one thing's been aimed at? They're unable to play fearless cricket. It's pretty kind of within a framework, within a plan, and that could hold them back.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are two sides to that coin of being at home. On the one hand, the huge sort of wave of euphoric support you get, and on the other, the pressure and expectation
of 1.2 billion people.
And of course, Indian players are used to doing that. They do that day in, day out. But it's for Rohit Sharma as captain and for the rest of those players, if things start going slightly wrong for them in the group stages, that pressure will build exponentially. So, it's not going to be an easy ride for them, and they're certainly not the only show in town. There are 2 or 3 other teams that are very capable of beating them. So it's not a foregone conclusion. I think that the way that it's formatted with everyone playing everyone means you're going to get the 4 best teams getting to the semi-finals, which I think is certainly those 4 best teams are likely to get to the semi-finals, which is a good place for us to be. And then you're in knockout cricket, and anything might happen from there.
Talking of the dynamics in the Indian dressing room, so you consider them favourites, but this time they've got Rohit Sharma as the captain instead of Virat Kohli. How does that change things for them?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Rohit Sharma's been doing the job for a while now, and he's got his sort of fingers under the desk, so to speak. His fingers under the desk. That's interesting. His feet under the desk.
Yeah. His fingers hopefully will be on it.
And one of the great one-day players and very experienced. So I think a different philosophy with him as captain. I think they've gone out and tried to be very aggressive with the bat, which I think is great, and they've got the players to do that. It probably frees up Virat to a certain degree. He's going to be under a huge amount of pressure anyway. To lump the captaincy on top of that is going to be an added dynamic for him. I mean, those big moments, those big tournaments is where the great players stand up. And so Virat will be determined to be able to play that role, that sort of prodigal son role, or however you want to describe it, the great national hero delivering when it really matters, and in order to sort of cement his legacy. And of course he's got the capabilities to do that, but of course that also means he's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders.
Yeah, he turns 35 during the tournament, so this probably will be his last World Cup. Obviously his last World Cup in his home nation. I mean, just to add even more pressure. But then, as you say, India must be used to that kind of thing, right?
Well, and certainly Virat Kohli, every time he bats, he's under huge pressure. I feel he's going to go into this tournament with the bit between his teeth. He's going to be determined to show everyone or create memories for people around what the great Virat Kohli did in the 2023 World Cup in India. And who'd bet against him performing? I mean, we saw it with Tendulkar and Dhoni in 2011. Yeah. And Virat's got a very good... But having said that, I mean, India are far from a one-man batting unit. I mean, they've got great batsmen wherever you look.
Yeah, actually, he's only maybe 2 or 3 centuries away from either matching or beating Sachin Tendulkar's ODI record. Is he up there alongside Sachin in your eyes?
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Could he even surpass Sachin in that respect?
Well, I think... Depends on how you mean surpass. I mean, I think he's got a chance of surpassing Sachin. I think he's a phenomenal one-day player. I mean, his record speaks for itself. The number of centuries he's scored. It's very hard in India to put anyone above Tendulkar, because Tendulkar's the sort of benchmark in a lot of ways. Which is the point
I'm trying to get at, really.
Yeah, I mean, but Virat is a worthy successor to Tendulkar in every way, and I love. Some people will go, he's overly aggressive and a bit too fiery at times, but I love his competitive juices. I love his style of batting. I love his hunger to score runs, and that's why he's been such a great player.
So what of England's chances? Obviously, they go there as holders. They're opening their tournament against, New Zealand, which is a rerun of the final last time around. They've got the T20 crown to their name as well. They're never going to have a chance to cement themselves further as one of the greatest white ball teams ever, right?
I think they've got a very good chance. I mean, I would have them as second favourites behind India. A lot of confidence there, a lot of experience. Very good captain, well-balanced bowling attack with fast bowling options and spin bowling options. And, of course, those big game players like Stokes and Buttler who know how to do it when it really matters. So, I mean, very hard to see any weaknesses in the England squad, but of course you're in Indian conditions, and we haven't always been great in Indian conditions. We've been better in white ball cricket than red ball cricket, but still hard to beat India on their home patch.
How big is it, Ben Stokes coming out of retirement?
Well, I just think for that ability to soak up pressure and play match-defining innings. I mean, I think Ben Stokes has played probably 3 of the 5 best innings of all time, I would have said, for England. You think about the World Cup final in 2019, you think about that Headingley-Ashes test match, and of course, I still think this summer at Lord's was a staggering performance as well. So I think there'll be a lot of people feeling more comfortable that he's in the team, especially when the team get under pressure. But at the same time, you've got players like Harry Brook and Livingston and these sort of fearless cricketers who may not get in the team as a result of Ben coming back. So it's definitely an asset, but we've got a lot of strength in depth in our batting resources.
But do you understand that he's going there not as a bowler? He's not going to bowl at all. It looks like just to save his knee, right?
Correct, yeah. And he's obviously, he's talking quite openly about the fact that he needs to sort of get his knees sorted out, and that's probably something that's going to happen after the World Cup. But, I mean, he's more than worth his place in the side as a batsman alone. He's done well when he's come in recently as just a batter, and I'd certainly want him in my side. There's no doubt about that.
Apart from Ben Stokes, who would you say is the biggest key component of that England side?
Buttler. I mean, Buttler is, he's the finisher. He's if not the best player in the world, he's in the top 3 or 4. He can go up and down the gears so easily, and of course he's got the extra challenge of being captain as well, and leading that team, and bearing in mind the big shoes he has to fill that are missing in Owen Morgan. So a big challenge for him. But if he has a good tournament, England are not going to be far away.
I was thinking, actually, Adil Rashid. when you think about the number of wickets he's taken as a spinner in ODIs for England, I don't think anybody's taken higher than or more than him. And in those conditions, as we've already mentioned, spin is key, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Mo and Rashid, so much experience in that part of the world. And India's not necessarily the easiest place to bowl leg spin. So, bit of a challenge there for Adil. I also just, at the back of my mind, I think Reece Topley's going to have a really good World Cup.
Right.
I think he's a phenomenal white ball bowler, left arm variation, tall, seems to take early wickets. And I think in this World Cup, early wickets are going to count for a lot.
Interestingly, Jofra Archer's part of the England camp, but he's there almost as a reserve, clearly, if there's an injury to the 15. So how carefully do we have to manage him here? Are you worried, should he get the call up, that he might aggravate, old injuries?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, he needs to get the call up first,
Yeah.
so you need other people to get injured. So it's not in his control, and it's not in England's control to a certain degree.
But would you be happy to see him?
It's
in
great
action?
to see him back in an
Yeah.
England shirt and around that squad. I think that the danger with Jofra Archer is because he's been able to do things that other people haven't been capable of. He came into the last World Cup as a rookie and bowled the super over. This guy who just came out of nowhere. Just that maybe unrealistic expectations for him to just come back in, having not played for so long, and just hit the ground running. So I'll just be wary of assuming any way that he's going to play a part in this World Cup. I think that there should be a longer term plan for him. He's had 2 stress fractures in his elbow already. Let's just play the long game here. And if that means him missing this World Cup and playing some T20 cricket next year, and then gradually building up to perhaps 50-over cricket and maybe even Test cricket. I think let's take the long view, because he's rushed back too quickly once already.
Yeah, because he's such a generational talent, right? You've got to look at the long-term game here.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, even if he came in, it's kind of lunacy to expect him just to be able to deliver straight away. I mean, he relies on pace, and it's hard to get straight up to that sort of 90-mile-an-hour plus pace if you haven't played much cricket, and if you're not very confident that your body is ready to go. So just great for him to be around the environment again. There's still people out there that worry that he's never going to play for England again. So let's get over that first hurdle first of him being ready to play, and then we'll take it from there.
So, okay, England and India, you're saying in the semi-finals. Third semi-finalist for you?
Australia.
Okay. Who haven't had the best of run-ups, I suppose, to this tournament in recent ODIs, but you can never discount them, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's the key. They're good under pressure, Australia,
Yeah.
generally. Again, you look at their squad, they've got very strong batting lineup with the likes of Warner and Smith and Labuschagne and Travis Head. The bowling attack, the seam bowling attack, we know is pretty much the best in the world with Cummins and Stark and Hazelwood. And Zampa is a very good sort of spin option as well. And
It's
then
their only spinner, though.
yeah, but they've got Maxwell and people they can bowl as well. I just feel like when you look at it, there are not too many holes in that team, and Australia generally play better under pressure. So it's in the subcontinent, which might count against them. In the subcontinent, you're always thinking that the subcontinental teams have got a better chance than perhaps in other parts of the world. But when I look at Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, I just think they're too young, and certainly in Bangladesh they're reliant on 1 or 2 players, and Pakistan as well. Ironically, Pakistan don't have a very good spin option, so and probably play slightly too conservatively for my liking, and sort of rely on Babar and Rizwan a little bit too much. So I just feel like Australia will come through. The fourth team's the hard one for me, because you could probably pick one out of 3 or 4 teams that will make that fourth semi-final.
Who are you
slot.
going for?
I'm actually going to go for New Zealand.
Are you?
Yeah.
The perennial semi-finalists.
Well, exactly. I mean,
Or finalists last time.
Yeah, and I again, easy to underrate. Great captain, very good all-rounders in likes of Mitchell and Neesham. Decent spin bowling options as well. And a very confident team. So I just feel like it wouldn't surprise me at all if Pakistan get into the semis, but we know with Pakistan generally consistency is a bit of a problem for them.
Yeah,
And
they're quite unpredictable.
correct. And
But is that a narrative that still continues to hamper them, do you think?
maybe not. I mean, I think that it's easy to sort of look at these things from a stereotypical lens, but they, the Asia Cup, they didn't play brilliantly in the Asia Cup. They've, I just feel like they're going to be under a huge amount of pressure in India, and it might just be too much for them.
It's been a while since they last played in India. I mean, that's a whole new kind of talking point in itself.
And you can imagine the sort of the bright spotlight on them wherever they go, and huge security and a lot of distractions off the field as well. And that can sort of lead you one or two ways. It can inspire people, but it can also be a very oppressive environment to work in as well.
Yeah, because you talk about that so-called stereotype with Pakistan, and you're not quite sure where they're at, or even if they're in a good frame of mind, it could go horribly wrong in a game or two. I mean, they kick off against the Netherlands, and I feel even for those kind of smaller nations, they can't be discounted to cause an upset or two, and that for Pakistan could set the tone for the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. I mean, there will be one or two upsets, and they're going to be generally as the tournament goes on. You probably find the pitches getting harder and harder to play on. Certainly, that was my experience in 2011, and so that's a great leveler between teams. Also, ironically, if Pakistan gets to the semis, they've got a good chance of winning it. It's one of those ones that the challenge for them is showing enough consistency through that group stage to win the sort of 6 games or whatever that you're going to need to get to those semi-finals.
Do you think we'll see more upsets in this World Cup than any other? Considering that the other teams we haven't spoken about, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka.
Well, I mean, they're
Sri Lanka. I mean, I know Sri Lanka isn't an upset as such, but they're not in those top 4 that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to be a lot of cases of teams beating teams, and I think, like always in India, the toss can be important in games. So, if you've got 2 quite even teams and one gets the benefit of winning the toss, that might make a difference. So I think you're going to get some upsets, but I think just the format, which is obviously everyone plays everyone, you've got 9 games, means that the cream will come to the top, and I think the best 4 teams will get through. The truth is South Africa are a good team, and they showed that against recently against Australia. You can't discount Sri Lanka. It's just impossible to call it completely. But I just don't think they've got enough quality to win enough games in that pool stage for me.
And if sat in this chair was Joss Butler, and you had to impart some advice at a World Cup as the skipper, what would you say?
World Cups are all about timing your run to a certain degree, and making sure you're in top form in the business end of the tournament. Now, that's not an easy thing. That's an easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to do. What I would be saying to him is be very, very clear on your approach for this tournament and stay true to it. I think what England did in 2019 was they went out there going, we're going to take the game to the opposition. We're going to play without fear. And then fear crept in over the course of that World Cup. And luckily they got it right just in time.
Yeah.
And so I think stay true to it. Make sure you are giving the same messages time and time again. You're probably going to have to rotate your team a bit to one degree or another, and make sure players understand that before the tournament starts, so you don't get players off board during the tournament. And be prepared to be flexible and adaptable on the pitch, according to the situation. So method of play, philosophy, very well embedded, but also just kind of being able to kind of go, well, this situation demands this of us.
Yeah.
And it might not be a 400 pitch. This one might be a 250 pitch.
And there's no other country quite like India when it hosts a 50-over World Cup. So what would you say to those who haven't experienced it before?
Well, it's just a joy to play. I mean, you feel like you're at the epicenter of the world, quite frankly, and you know how important this cricket is for anyone who's watching in India. And of course, if you get the opportunity to play against India, it's one of the real highlights of your career in a World Cup over there. So it's going to be a festival of cricket. It's going to be full of noise. It's going to be chaotic. Things will go wrong. But that real energy and buzz that comes with cricket in India will create lifelong memories for the players. So one to savour. I mean, it's not easy travelling around. There's a lot of travel. Getting through airports is not easy. Having time for yourself is not simple. So managing your energy is important as well. But you've got to go in with that attitude. I'm going to savour this. This is going to be a really memorable moment in my life, and not allow those sort of little things that can go wrong in India to sort of upset you or knock you off course.
Yeah, and if it is England v India in the final, they're going to be well and truly up against it, aren't they? England, that is.
Well, yeah, Ahmedabad in front of 100,000 people. Good luck.
122.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, so that was the other thing. 122,000 capacity. I don't think there is a sporting venue in the world that is that big for a final. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger.
No, and I remember playing in India in the 2011 World Cup in Bangalore, and there were probably 50,000 there, and I could not speak to any of my players. Like trying to get fielders to move positions, it was utterly impossible. So just imagine what that's like with 130,000 people there, and the energy and all that sort of stuff. But let's get there first, and then worry about that one.
Andrew, listen, you certainly whetted my appetite for what's to come in the Cricket World Cup. Thank you so much indeed for coming in and sharing some painful memories, but also, some of your highlights too as an individual. And I wish you well in the future.
Thanks, it's been a real pleasure.
And that's it from In The Zone. I certainly hope you've enjoyed watching or indeed listening to it in association with Gambling Zone, the trusted online gambling comparison site. I'm Manish Bhasin, and I'll see you soon.